Mr. President, 2 years ago, not long after I became chairman of the Senate's Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, I made the decision to undertake an investigation of the for-profit sector of higher education. My reason for doing so was compelling. Congress had just finished making huge new investments in the Pell Grant program. Meanwhile, enrollment in for-profit colleges had increased 225% over the previous 10 years, compared to 31% for the rest of higher education. So this is what we were looking at. The enrollment in the for-profit sector kept going up, and finally in 2006, it took a huge increase up to from 765,000 in 2001 to over 2.5 million almost in 2010. So while students at for-profit colleges made up between 10 and 13% of all the students, for-profit colleges now were receiving almost 25% of all student loans and Pell Grants. Meanwhile, troubling reports began to surface. Prospective students being lied to by aggressive recruiters. Other recruiters showing up at wounded warrior facilities and homeless shelters. Students saddled with a mountain of debt, unable to find jobs. 2 years later, our investigation is complete. The committee has held 6 hearings, issued 30 document requests, compiled data from multiple agencies, interviewed many former students and employees, and compiled a fact-based authoritative public record. Earlier today, we announced the release of our final report called For-Profit Higher Education: The Failure to Safeguard the Federal Investment and Ensure Student Success. This report provides a detailed explanation of how Congress has failed to properly monitor student outcomes in this sector of higher education, or to safeguard the enormous investment taxpayers are making. Pell Grants going to the for-profit sector have grown from $2.5 billion to $8.8 billion in just 5 years. And again, this is what we're looking at. Just think that we had to do something. And look at this, $2.5 billion up to $8.8 billion in just 5 years. In just 5 years. This is Pell Grants. As I said, about 10% of the students, 25% of all the Pell Grants. And this was twice as fast as anything else in higher education. As the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee that funds Pell Grants, we work very hard to make sure Pell Grants keep up, that we've increased them. So it was distressing and outrageous to learn that a disproportionate share of this federal investment is going to schools that are raking in big profits but failing to educate our students. Now we'll put up another chart. You have to ask the question, has the American taxpayer gotten an acceptable return on this huge investment in students attending school in the for-profit sector? Well, the answer is a resounding no. More than half of the students who enrolled in 2008 and 2009 had withdrawn by 2010. At many of them, as this chart shows, the withdrawal rate was 67% here for Ashford University. Now, what this means is a student who signed up, got a loan, got a Pell Grant, signed up for one of these schools, 1 year later, 50% of them were not there. As high as 67% at Bridgepoint, Ashford University, weren't there. So you say, well, what happened to the money? Well, guess what? Bridgepoint got the Pell Grant. Bridgepoint got the Stafford loan. The student dropped out, and the student has the debt. The student has the debt, and the student has nothing to show for it. No appreciable skills, no diploma, nothing. In fact, they're worse off than when they started, because now they have a huge debt hanging around their neck. I just want to say that in this report, what you will find is overwhelming documentation of exorbitant tuition, unsavory recruiting practices, abysmal student outcomes, taxpayer dollars spent excessively on marketing and pocketed as profits, and regulatory evasion and manipulation. And I'll have more to say about that later. Now, again, these practices are not the exception. They're the norm. They're systemic throughout the industry. But there are, of course, individual exceptions. Now, again, there are real differences among the various for-profit colleges. That's why we took 30 profiles of 30 different companies. We took 15 that were publicly owned, investor-owned, and we took 15 that are more private, and we took some from the biggest to the smallest so that we would have a broad picture of what was happening in this industry. Now, again, compared to the industry overall, some for-profit colleges are doing a better job for their students. I would mention Strayer, Walden, National American University, American Public University, all private, for-profit schools doing a much better job for their students. There are also for-profit colleges that have had serious shortcomings, but they're beginning to make some changes, and they're now open to new thinking about how to improve student outcomes. I would include in this list Kaplan, DeVry, and Apollo, which is basically University of Phoenix. But the bottom line is that a large share of the $32 billion that taxpayers invested in these schools in 2010 was wasted, and we cannot allow this to continue. Why? Because 73% of undergraduate students in this country are non-traditional students. For example, they're holding down jobs, they're older, perhaps they have family responsibilities, come from maybe low-income communities, they may be the first in their family to attend college. Our nation's existing network of public and nonprofit colleges and community colleges cannot meet the demand for higher education or meet President Obama's goal of producing more college graduates without increasing the number of Americans who spend at least some time in higher education. We need for-profit schools to offer these students more than a path to enrollment. We need them to offer students a path to success and graduation. We uncovered two overall problems with the status quo in the for-profit higher education. One, billions of taxpayer dollars are being diverted from the educational activities they were intended to finance. And two, taxpayers' dollars are being used to do real, lasting harm to the students these colleges enroll. Again, think about it. In just 1 year that we examined, more than 500,000 students enrolled in for-profit colleges and then quit. Almost every one of those dropouts left school worse off than when they began, with no tangible academic benefit, but saddled with debt that cannot be discharged in bankruptcy, far less able now to continue their higher education in the future because they will have defaulted on those loans. They will not be able to get further loans, and they won't get any more Pell Grants. So you got to ask, why is this happening? One of the reasons is that the tuition at for-profit colleges is grossly out of line with the cost of comparable programs at public and nonprofit institutions, and fails to reflect the often dubious value of a degree from a for-profit. As this chart shows, and this is average, from a public college in yellow, the purple here is for-profit colleges. For an average certificate program, public schools, $4,249, this is tuition. At a for-profit, $19,806. For an average associate degree, 2 years, $8,000 in public schools, that's be your community colleges and others, $34,900, almost $35,000 in a for-profit school. And for a bachelor's degree, $52,000 in public schools, $62,000 in the for-profit schools. 20%. Think about this. It costs 20% more for an online degree from Ashford University than a degree from the University of Michigan. Now, you would think that since these schools don't have bricks and mortar, they don't have to pay heating bills and cooling bills and upkeep of dorms and all that kind of stuff, you would think that they could offer these courses much cheaper than what they're doing. That's not the case. Much more expensive. So, why doesn't this lower overhead translate into lower tuition? And we'll put up the next chart. The answer is that the efficiencies of online education are not passed on to students. Instead, those lower costs of delivery go straight to profits, marketing, and executive salaries. Tuition is set primarily based on maximizing revenue from federal taxpayer dollars and on what executives think the market will bear. That's sort of what this chart shows. Red line is the average available federal aid to a student. This would be Stafford loans and Pell Grants. This is average, $13,205. When we examined all of the private schools, and this is just a representative sample, they're all just above that line. In fact, we have internal documents from many of these schools from their executives saying that they're going to set their tuition in order to make sure that they can maximize access to these federal dollars. Now, there are exceptions, and I wanted to put one in here. American Public Institute, as I said earlier, they're way down here, and they make a profit. They're profitable. They provide a good service. They're not pegging their tuition costs at just what they can maximize. So there are examples out there, but vast majority set it just at what the market will bear and how they can maximize their federal dollars. And how much are these federal dollars? About 83%. About 83%. So I think another feature of the for-profit schools is their nearly almost total reliance on taxpayer money. They say they're for-profit, but it's not like a for-profit from a private business that is competing in selling cars or washing machines or refrigerators or maybe some other kind of a service where you can pick and choose. About 83%. This is military, 3.8%, 79.3% is student federal aid dollars. 83% comes directly from the taxpayers of this country. So if for-profit colleges charge exorbitant tuition and often provide an inferior education while experiencing sky-high dropout rates, how are they able to recruit a steady stream of new students? The answer is that for-profit colleges are what I would call a marketing machine. They spend 42.1% of their revenues on marketing, recruiting, and profit, yet they only spent 17% of revenues on actual instruction. By comparison, the University of North Carolina system spends less than 2% of its budget on marketing. 2%. And what we see here is 42%. 42% on marketing and profits, 17% on student instructions. And this is interesting here, 40.7% all of their spending. I would point out herein is our executive salaries, executive compensation, bonuses paid to recruiters, and on and on and on. Only 17% for instruction. Most colleges, when they talk about marketing, is down around 2 or 3%. I'll bet the University of Virginia is probably down there. I don't know. We might have that documentation. I know University of Iowa system is down around that 2-3% total for marketing. You see their ads, different things for public universities, nonprofit universities, but nothing close to 42%. And this is what leads to what we call the churn. Students come in, they get recruited, they get their Pell Grants, they get their loans, the school gets the money. A year later, the student drops out, and so the marketers go out and bring in more students. And so you get this tremendous churn in the student body at these for-profit schools. Perhaps most critically, these institutions fail to provide adequate student support services, as I said. And this is a critical finding of our report. Despite knowingly enrolling some of the most at-risk students in our country, many of these schools don't provide those students with the services common sense tells us they need to succeed. How many times have we heard from the for-profit industry, but yes, we're different because we're enrolling students that don't go to your normal colleges. They don't go to the University of Iowa. They don't go to the University of Virginia. These are non-traditional students. Many of them are poor. That is true. But that's who they're recruiting. Why are they recruiting them? They get the most Pell Grants and the most Stafford loans, student loans. And that's what the college gets. Now, if they're doing that, then they really need to provide mentoring, tutoring, some kind of alumni network, job partnerships, genuine career counseling. Two of the largest for-profit companies provide no career counseling or placement to students whatsoever. And yet these are the very students that need the most help when they go to college. You know, students from upper income families that go to good schools, they don't need that. English language learners, Latinos, African American students, those that they intuitively know they need more education. And maybe they've lost a job, and now they realize, I got to do something. I got to get a better education. These marketers go after them. These marketers go after them. And this is what our report found. If you look at the enrollment of these schools, as I've said, it's gone up tremendously. The enrollment's gone up. Look at the recruiters. Just from 2007 to 2010, we went from a little over 20,000 to 35,202 recruiters at 24 of these companies. Down here in the red line, these are your career services. These are the people that counsel and mentor and tutor and help you with career guidance, and gone up a bit. Huge increase in students, big increase in recruiters, almost no increase at all in career counselors. This is a failure, an abject failure. So, Mr. President, this report is the first comprehensive, fact-based analysis of this industry. Now, earlier today, I saw that the Association for-profit institutions called this a flawed process. As near as I can understand their critique, the process was flawed because it was about them. But this is what congressional oversight's about. This was not an overnight thing. This is what we produced. 4 huge volumes, data-driven, documentation on what's happening in this industry. This is the summary, and this holds most of what we found. These 3 here would have all of the backup documentation that is needed to support the findings that we had. We have before us a factual record that we've never had before. Department of Education didn't have it. No one's had it before. This can guide us as we move towards reauthorization of the Higher Education Act next year. Now again, in reauthorization, we'll also be looking at traditional higher education. We've already held 2 hearings on college affordability, and there's no question that we need to find a way to improve outcomes not just at for-profit colleges, but also at low-cost community colleges. That said, the fact is there are problems that are unique to the for-profit sector that will require some unique solutions. We have seen some progress on this front. As I said, I've met with some of them. They have expressed a determination to reform and to do right by their students. In addition, the Department of Education took steps that are beginning to have real impacts. In April, President Obama issued an executive order that will help to ensure our veterans are not the subject of deceptive and misleading recruiting, and it will help soldiers and veterans to make better decisions about where to use their GI Bill dollars. Last month, Kentucky Attorney General Jack Conway led a 20-state Attorney General settlement with Quinn Street one of the companies engaged in some of the most egregiously misleading recruiting efforts targeted at veterans. But these are not enough. As I said, there's an important role for for-profit colleges in our increasingly knowledge-based economy. A solid record of student success is in the national interest. The challenge is to require the companies to be as focused on student success as they are on financial success. Now, there are 4 things that we need to do. First, we need to know how every student enrolled in college is doing, not just first-time, full-time students. And this is a flaw in our system. The Department of Education only tracks first-time, full-time students. Most of the students that go to our for-profit schools are not first-time, full-time students. They're part-time students. So what we need to do is to any student that gets a Pell Grant and/or Stafford loan, we need to know how that student's doing and how they do later on. Secondly, we need to be very clear that federal education money has to be spent on education, not on advertising, not recruiting, not lobbying. That's just common sense. I challenge anyone to stand up here and say, no, 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 they should use taxpayers' dollars to lobby here. They should use taxpayers' dollars to advertise or pay recruiters. No. We have to be very clear. They can spend it on education, but not advertising, recruiting, or lobbying. Third, we need to make sure these schools are providing at least a basic level of student services that would give the at-risk students they enroll a fair shot at completing. If there is one thing that distinguishes good for-profit schools from the bad ones, this is it: a genuine commitment to providing a network of student supports. As I mentioned, mentoring, tutoring, employer partnerships, genuine career counseling, not just in the beginning, but all the way through the program. The good schools that are doing that are turning out quality products. Fourth, we have to think seriously about outcome-based thresholds, particularly for colleges that get a very high proportion of their revenues from taxpayers. We need to build on the gainful employment rule to ensure that students are not being loaded up with debt that they just can't repay. I am confident that the record that we are laying out today will make some of these reforms inevitable as we move forward. I want to also thank some of my colleagues and to note that work has already begun on legislative solutions. Senator Hagan is sponsoring a bill to ban the use of federal financial aid dollars for marketing. Senators Murray and Webb are sponsoring a comprehensive legislation to better protect service members and veterans using the post-9/11 GI Bill. Senator Lautenberg is sponsoring a bill to provide every veteran who receives education aid from the Department of Veterans Affairs with counseling to help make the right choices, to create a system to track veterans' complaints of waste, fraud, and abuse by these schools. Senators Carper and Durbin are sponsoring bills to address the absurdity of not counting all federal money in the restriction on how much money schools can receive. One of the other things that we picked up on as we started this investigation was the tremendous focus that these for-profits were now making on veterans, especially Iraq and Afghanistan veterans and active duty personnel. Well, the reason for that is because we have a 90-10 rule, which says these for-profit schools can only get 90% of their money from the federal government. The other 10% has to come from someplace else, private sources. But that doesn't count military. So if you're a for-profit school and you've bumped up on the 90-10 level, you can't go out and recruit any more people. But if you recruit one military person, you can get 9 more non-military. So that pays for them to go after military. Well, Senators Carper and Durbin have a bill in to stop that. Senator Durbin is also a leader on the issue of private student loans and bankruptcy, as well as a great partner in helping to draw attention to the experiences of students who have attended these schools. I also want to thank other members of the HELP Committee who have been active participants at hearings. Senators Franken, Senator Merkley, Senator Blumenthal. I've also received a great deal of support and encouragement along the way from organizations dedicated to ensuring that students have a genuine path to success in higher education. In particular, I thank the Council for Opportunity in Education, the Education Trust, the Leadership Council on Civil Rights, the Institute for College Access and Success, Campus Progress, and the National Association for College Admissions Counseling. All of them have been involved in helping us over the last couple of years to get the data that we need. On behalf of service members and veterans, we have had tremendous assistance from the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans Association, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the Military Officers Association of America, Blue Star Families, the Vietnam Veterans Association, Student Veterans of America, the American Legion, Vet Jobs, Vets First, Paralyzed Veterans of America, the National Association for Black Veterans, the National Guard Association, the Air Force Sergeants Association, the Association of the United States Navy, Wounded Warriors, and Veterans for Common Sense. All have been involved. We've gone to them, and they have been so forthcoming and so helpful in helping our staff and me to understand what is happening. I also want to thank the witnesses at our hearing, several of whom have been subjected to unwarranted and undeserved criticism. In particular, I'd like to thank Steve Eisman, who provided the committee with unique expertise and insights about the industry in a way that helped policymakers understand that these companies were much more than just colleges. As everyone in this body knows, people with a financial stake in an industry testify before Congress every day, and like Mr. Eisman, provide some of the most insightful and accurate information we receive. I'd also like to thank former Westwood employee Joshua Purian, who provided a real-world view of working as a for-profit recruiter. He was willing to come forward for the sole purpose of shedding light on this industry, and the criticism he has sustained speaks poorly of those who claim to believe in the valuable role that whistleblowers play. I want to thank my staff, who have pursued this investigation tirelessly and tenaciously. I want to thank my oversight team and my help committee, who spearheaded the investigation, analyzed the numbers, calculated all the outcomes, interviewed students and employees, and reviewed thousands of pages of documents, and prepared this final report. That oversight team was led by Beth Stein. She was assisted throughout 6 hearings, 3 previous reports, spreadsheets, charts, megabytes of documents by Elizabeth Baylor, Ryan McCord. Most recently, they were joined by Kia Hamandanchi and Brian Burrows, who have dedicated many long hours to the research, writing, and publication of this report. I owe tremendous thanks to the several staffers, no longer with the committee, but who played a critical role in this investigation: Bethany Little, Luke Swarthout, Robin Giuliano. I'd like to thank both my former and my current Help Committee staff directors, Dan Smith and Pam Smith, who have ably guided this challenging effort. Our communication staffers have patiently explained the 90-10 rule, the cohort default rate, and the fact that we don't actually know how veterans attending for-profit schools are doing to hundreds of reporters across the country. And I thank Justine Sessions, Kate Frischman, and Liz Donovan. My education policy staffers, who joined this effort more recently, but who will be carrying us forward in our legislative reform efforts: Mildred Otero, Spiros Protosaltis, Libby Mazouk, as well as Carrie Wofford, who have played a tremendous role in outreach to groups across the country and been particular advocate on behalf of veterans impacted by the practices of the for-profit colleges. I want to thank our tremendous group of law clerks who dedicated many hours to the less glamorous task in getting this put together: Aubrey Connor, Joel Murray, Lauren Scott, David Krim, Ashley Waddell, Lindsay Daughtry, Zach Mason, Sophie Casimau, and Brittany Clement. A special thank you to the law clerks who helped write and prepare the report: Lucy Stein, Nicholas Wonder, Shauna Agan, Kagan Buchanan, Douglas Durando. and to Andrea Jarko, who has juggled multiple roles and worn multiple hats. For their assistance along the way, I want to thank Paul Edenfield, Madeline Daniels, Alyssa Davis, also Dan Goldberg for his always sound analysis and advice. Finally, I'd like to thank Denise Lowry and Carolyn Bolden on the committee staff who spent many hours making the report as error-free as humanly possible. So today we bring the HELP Committee investigation of for-profit colleges to a close. But the record we have laid out leaves much to be done. And I look forward to continuing to work with my Senate colleagues to help for-profit colleges realize their potential as a genuinely transformative force in higher education. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor.